Hi, and welcome to Mrs. PM Reads. Today we are continuing in our story, Shoeless Joe by W. P. Kinsella. This will be part 4, section 8, I believe. And in the last video, we basically learned about Ray's desire to be a carny and his wonderment that it was his brother who's working that type of career field. And so that's where we pick up. All right, so he's still at the carny. And this guy says, "You old enough to be working?" a man said to me. "Should be in school," grumbled another. "His parents are probably show people, and you know what they're like," said a bulky woman wearing a blue print dress and a matching bonnet. The barker returned and thrust into my hands as wondrous an object as I have ever seen, shiny as a hubcap, small as a can opener, able to turn in my hand like a chrome frog. I've never seen anything like it. Perhaps it was indeed a left-handed glass stretcher. The barker bent down and spoke into my face. "Run this right back to the guy who sent you," the barker said, but to his shoulder, as if he still had his mic under his chin. "This is the only left-handed one in the whole carnival, so tell him to guard it with his life. You sure you know where you're going, kid?" I nodded dumbly. Clutching the wonderful silver-jointed object in my hand, I whipped through the crowd and backed down the midway to the bottle booth. I sat my treasure delicately on top of the very trunk I had damaged and looked up into the face of the carny, who seemed to be genuinely surprised to see me. "What have you got there?" he said, and lifted up the object as he might pull a hair from his breakfast cereal. "It's what you sent me for," I said. "The guy at the freak show gave it to me. He says to tell you it's the only—" "Kid, you just can't do nothing right, can you?" he said scornfully. I could feel my mouth drop open. "Kid, I sent you for a left-handed glass stretcher. Any fool can see this is a right-handed one." He held the object up as he might hold a dead mouse by its tail. Then he dropped. He dropped it in the side pocket of his stained plaid jacket. "Now you go back down there and get me a left-handed one, just like I sent you for, and hurry up about it." I pushed through the crowd and began running again. But about halfway to the freak show, a strange feeling, like bees buzzing, began low in my body and gradually moved up to my stomach and chest, leaving me feeling empty and foolish. It began to dawn on me that I had been the butt of a joke. I stopped and looked around. The carnival buzzed around me. But what if I was wrong? What if the man from the bottle booth came after me, made my father pay for the damage to his trunk? I looked down at myself and cursed my choice of clothing. I was wearing a bright green t-shirt with horizontal white stripes. I stood out like a large green apple. Looking over my shoulder all the way, I skulked to the exit and made my way to the parking lot, making certain I was not followed. When my father and Richard returned from the races, they found me asleep in the truck box, my t-shirt carefully covered by a sheet of canvas. Later, now we're back. Memory's over. We're back at the ball field. Later, while the game is on, while Moonlight Graham patrols the right field grass as Salinger watches contentedly, while my catcher, whom I haven't been able to approach, crouches behind the plate, while Eddie Skizzen sits alone in voluntary exile about 5 seats from Karen and me. I hear a car cross the cattle guard and head up the gravel lane to the house. Moments later, Mark and Bluestein appear at the corner of the grandstand. Mark waves his arms animatedly to attract my attention. Bluestein holds a clipboard on which he is making notes. The game stops. The players politely move out of the way as the interlopers move toward left field. I thought I made it clear that you weren't welcome here, I holler down. Can you come down here? We want to talk to you. Do you like it here? Asks Bluestein, his eyes glittering amber like a dog's. I can feel the cold winds of winter peeking over the horizon as I stare down at this piece of land that I love more than any place else on the earth. This place where I have been happy. Yes, I like it here, I reply, but I won't grovel for you. You blackmailed Eddie into selling me out. I want to enjoy what time I have left here without you snooping around and gloating. We want to make a deal, says Mark, so you can stay on the land, adds Bluestein. We'll leave the house. You and Annie can live in it free for as long as you like. No rent. It will make your responsibilities lighter while you find a new job. And the baseball field? This, says Mark, waving his arm around to take in the whole field. You have to leave it too. Mark nods to Bluestein, who scribbles on the clipboard. Do you realize what this land is worth? Says Mark. Over $2,200 an acre, I reply. Isn't it about time you grew up? Mark explodes. You sit up there, and he points towards the bleacher, like the world can't get at you. You build this whole stupid. His face reddens as he struggles for the words. You're virtually bankrupt, and we're offering you a way out because I love my sister. Because you're afraid of your sister. You're totally ungrateful, booms Mark. No, this monstrosity will be the first thing to go, and I'll drive the bulldozer that levels it myself. Behind him, Bluestein draws a large X over the calculations he has made on the clipboard. Then we have nothing more to say, says Mark, and I feel cold, as if I have just pronounced my own eviction my own eviction, wrong page, notice, that makes sense, which indeed I probably have. I also feel the wind from the cornfield pushing against my back. I stand up and with a fanning motion of my arm, spray my orange drink out in an arc that the wind carries over Mark's and Bluestein's heads, stippling their $300 suits. They both yell in anguish. Then Karen, who has been sitting silently beside me, rises and tosses her own drink in their direction. But her arm is not strong enough, and the drink pours directly over the fence. Bluestein partially fends off the deluge with his clipboard. You'll be sorry, he shouts up at us. Karen hugs my leg, and I tousle her red curls. I laugh to think that I have just about reached my maximum level of violence by pouring orangeade on an accountant. Then Mark's voice roars up at us, and he's a fraud. He points at Eddie Skizzen like a tent meeting evangelist pointing at the devil. His mustache curls as he speaks. Eddie has been sitting, leaning on his cane, his chin resting on his hands, which are cupped over the serpent head. He never played in the major leagues. Not only that, but he hardly played in the minors. 1 year, part-time, for a Class D team in Montana over 60 years ago. and he's been passing himself off around here for 40 years as a Chicago Cub, the oldest living Chicago Cub. You're supposed to know all about baseball, Mark yells, turning his wet wrath toward me again. I don't even follow the game, but 10 minutes in the U of I library, and I found out all about him. He points accusingly at Eddie again. Eddie is shrinking before our eyes, as if he were an inflatable toy, and Mark's words were pins. I can almost hear the air escaping. You promised you wouldn't tell, says Eddie in a bland, defeated voice. You said if I sold you the mortgage, you'd never tell Ray or anyone. You're a joke, Mark rages. Everyone knows about you, except Ray here. They humor you because it would be too embarrassing to call you a liar to your face. Crazy old Eddie, they say. He likes to think he played baseball for the Cubs. Eddie turns his face away. It's all right, Eddie, I say. I knew. I've known all along. And it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to your friends. I wave my hand to take in Jerry and Karen, and then, with a more expansive motion, I take in the whole ballpark. You promised, Eddie says hollowly. I remember my own indignation after I discovered Eddie's secret. After I talked to him on the street in Iowa City that windy March afternoon, I had hustled off to the nearby Iowa City Public Library to find a copy of Baseball Encyclopedia and check out Eddie's statistics. I'd had an uneasy feeling that something was not right, for he had spoken of Wrigley Field in 1908, 09, and 10. And I knew, without looking it up, that that was at least 5 years before Wrigley Field was built, and that in those years, the Cubs would have played in West Side Park. It seems like a natural enough mistake, though, if Eddie was indeed as old as he said he was. But I marveled at the idea of the oldest living Chicago Cub. It was like finding a mummified baseball in an attic, yellow as if varnished, hard with age, but with a long dead star's signature staring out, bright and real as the day the player signed it. I felt as if I'd stumbled onto a priceless autograph, something I could cherish, hold on to, hold back from other baseball fanatics, as if it were a 1932 Smead Jolie baseball card with an advertisement for Turret cigarettes on the back. Something as elusive as the perfect game or a .400 lifetime hitter, a collector's dream. At the library, I took the baseball encyclopedia from the shelf and turned to the pitcher register. And I remember the disappointment and then the anger I felt as I found that no one named Skizens had ever pitched in the major leagues. I tried the player register in case I had misunderstood about his being a pitcher. But I also drew a blank there. For whatever reason, Eddie Skizzen had been lying to me. I closed the book sadly and headed for home. I told Annie about him, but mentioned only that he had a farm for rent, not that he was a fraud when it came to playing for the Cubs. But I understand Eddie Skizens. I know that some of us, and for some reason I am one of them, get to reach out and touch our heart's desire like a child who gets to pet the nose of an old horse, soft as satin, safe as a grandfather's lap. And I know too that when most people reach for that heart's desire, it appears not as a horse, but as a tiger. And they are rewarded with snarls, frustration, and disillusionment. I imagine Eddie Skizens has decided, if I can't have what I want most in life, then I'll pretend I had it in the past and talk about it and live it and relive it until it is real and solid and I can hold it to my heart like a precious child. Once I've experienced it so completely, no one can ever take it away from me. How can you let him get away with it? Mark shouts up at me, his fists clenched like a politician making a damning point. You claim to know so much about baseball, claim it's so pure and wonderful. How can you let him worm his way into your game? How can you tell him it's all right? How can you forgive him for all he's done? And I wonder how I can, but I know I can. Fact and fantasy swirl together. Worse men than Eddie have been forgiven by better men than me, I reply. Much later, I hold Annie in my arms, loving her, experiencing a whole separate world that makes me think of the thrilling isolation I feel when I walk through our cornfield between the high whispering rows. Whatever happens, I'm with you, champ, she says, and erases my anxiety with her soft, sweet love. The days pass, and each evening, as if time is controlled by a computer, perhaps in some distant dimension, the phantom baseball park superimposes itself on my labor of love as the sun dissolves into the horizon, tinting the clouds flamingo pink. We watch the games, our usual group. Not one of us has said a word to Eddie about what happened. It is as if we don't mention it because to do so would make it real. Eddie is paler and more silent. His hands tremble noticeably, even when clutched tightly on the head of his cane. Some evenings, Richard sits with us a while, like watching a TV screen full of shadows and static, he says, and eventually walks away. A perplexed expression on his face, like that of a pagan watching but not comprehending a religious ceremony. The catcher has been on a hitting rampage the last few games. He is more than adequate behind the plate. He'll be with us for a while, says Joe, grinning happily. You have good judgment when it comes to catchers. But I still can't bring myself to face him. As with most of life, anticipation has been 9/10 of the actual event. I sense that the catcher has some reservations about me because after each game, he exits through the gate in the center field almost before the stands begin emptying. Breathing a sigh of relief each time the confrontation has been delayed, I walk across the field with Joe Jackson, Happy Felsch, and Swede Risberg. And a number of us end up squatting or sitting Indian style on the magic grass of left field. There we go. Salinger tells the ball players the story of how I am soon going to lose the farm. What would happen to all of you if this ballpark is raised, leveled, planted in corn? He asks. They exchange knowing glances, but remain silent. Some of us waited a long time for this chance, says Shoeless Joe. Joe was the first of the unlucky 8 to die. He was 64 in December of 1951 when his heart finally gave out. Freddie McMullen went in 52, Buck Weaver in 56, Lefty Williams in 59, Happy Felsch died in 64 in Milwaukee, Eddie Cicotti in Detroit in 69 at 84. Chick Gandil lived to be 82, and Swede Risberg outlived Gandil by nearly 5 years, dying in Red Bluff, California in 1975 at age 81. The Swede was indeed a hard guy. That's a lot of numbers. Why can't you make a living on a farm like this? Someone asks. I explain that I am equipment poor and interest poor, and that my income has not kept pace with the price of land or the price of fuel, which has tripled while my income has remained stable. What can we do to help? Says Lefty Williams. I was born on a farm in Missouri. I got a strong back. and I'm pretty handy with my hands. Several others nod. I farmed some too, says Buck Weaver. I hoed a few acres of cotton myself, says Shoeless Joe with a smile. It's not the work that's killing me, it's paying for the equipment. I begin, but I am cut off by Lefty Williams. How about horses, he says. Your machines do the work of 10 men with horses, but here you sit with more men than you can use. Sell off your machines, pay off your loans, buy a few horses, and we'll do your work for you. I remember horses, says Eddie Skizzens. I grew up on a corn farm in Nebraska. They used to be my farm. This used to be my farm. Harrowing, disking, plowing, planting, picking, I've done it all. Johnny, the catcher, was raised on a dirt farm in North Dakota, says Shoeless Joe, looking right at me. Bet he'd be willing to help out. And that is our stopping spot. But it's starting to get interesting again. Can you imagine? Well, I mean, the whole thing is a fiction and a fantasy, but ghosts, farming with plow horses. All right, you guys. I hope you're enjoying this story. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.